Welcome back, everyone. Excited to have the next session, the second session of the ClimateTech Founders Summit, with three really exciting ecosystem leaders from across North America, Europe as well, from the UK, from France. We're covering quite a bit of geographical spectrum with this panel. And the reason we put this panel in at this time was really to dive a little bit deeper into the climate tech ecosystem and what we believe needs to happen to bring climate tech to the next level and unlock more entrepreneurial potential. We already had a discussion previously with Candace and Chilps from On Deck to figure out, okay, how can we get more people really to leave their job and become a founder and enter the ecosystem. And I think all three of you are constantly working with people that are either on that transition or that are already a founder and that are looking to grow their companies. And in the audience today, we have about 300 founders and ecosystem leaders, investors that are really keen to learn from you and get some tangible advice on how they can maximize their impact, how they can be part of more entrepreneurs moving into climate tech. So really excited to have the three of you in here. So today we have Avra van der Zee. She is the COO of Elemental Accelerator, really one of the leading accelerators, I would say, in the climate tech space. I'll let you explain more in a second on that, but they've invested in more than 130 companies so far and really are actually focused in companies all over the world. We have Santiago Levebvre join us. He is the founder and CEO of ChangeNOW Summit. ChangeNOW is the biggest gathering of impact-driven change makers or solutions for the planet, happening every year in Paris. Next year, finally in person again. I'm really looking forward to that. I think more than 20,000 people expected to join, probably even more now. I lost track. It's really growing every year. So excited to have you as well as somebody that's constantly talking to lots of founders, but also people across policy and large corporates in the space. And then we have Chris Coleridge, who's the founder of Carbon 13, incubator and company builder based in Cambridge in the UK. And they've basically developed a program to help people really from zero to launching a company. I'm so excited to have you here as well, Chris. I'll let each of you introduce yourself briefly. What brings you into the climate tech space personally? And how does your organization basically make a difference in that space? So let's start with Avra again.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Maiko, and my fellow panelists for convening. It's so great to see everybody and to have these conversations. So I'm the COO of Elemental, as Maiko explained. And Elemental is a climate tech investment platform. We're an accelerator, we're a policy lab, and we're more. As Maiko mentioned, we've been investing and supporting climate tech companies for over a decade. So we're in here early thinking about scaling solutions. And we invest across water, agriculture, energy, the circular economy, and transportation. So yes, to date, as mentioned, we've invested in over 130 growth stage companies and celebrated more than 20 exits. That's the benefit of being around for so long. But at our core, we're also trying to make sure that as we're scaling equitable, market-driven solutions to climate change, we're also working on redesigning those systems that brought us to this place we're in now, right? So what do we mean by redesigning systems? Well, we don't just invest in support companies. We also really invest in a project-based approach and a suite of interdisciplinary support. So what is needed to help scale and redesign the solutions? You know, community partnerships, policy, corporate partnerships, career development and pathways, equity initiatives. And in terms of how we can get more people into climate tech, I mean, I think it's this message, right? This urgency is here, right? There's an urgency to finding solutions. We're all looking at a clock, but it's not same old, right? It's about building a future that's different from the past. So yes, we're restoring the planet, but hopefully transforming the world. So that's why I'm here, because I'm so passionate about this idea of transformation. my background is as an entrepreneur. I come from the startup world, lawyer by training, but have been working to scale companies in the transportation space. And so, applying that lens of how do we scale solutions, it's really what drives me.
Thank you, Avra. Let's continue with Santiago.
Well, thanks, Michael. And glad to meet everyone here. We don't know each other yet, and I think this will be a great conversation ahead. So very quickly, what brings me here today and in the field of impact more generally, I would say that I always been divided, between making business, because I always loved being an entrepreneur, the capacity an entrepreneur has to shape the world in a way, and also divided between this and the will to have an impact and leave a positive footprint behind, And for a long time, either you were doing business or you were doing social. You weren't doing both. And so I think that I managed to fix this big divide inside when I did an MBA at INSEAD. It was 2015. It was also the year of the COP21 here in Paris. And I started to see a lot of great entrepreneurs having solutions to solve our major global issues. And I said, okay, I want to be part of this. And I had a background also in digital entrepreneurship, and in the tech scene, usually you know where to go and find funding, where to have an accelerator. But when you started just as an impact entrepreneur 5 years ago, you didn't have any clue about this. So we wanted to create this major ecosystem with a big event every year, which gathers now, well, you said it, it's fast growing. We started in 2017 with 2,000 participants from 20 countries. And the third edition was with 28,000 participants from 120 countries, 1,000 solutions that we gather every year, and we connect around them investors, media, corporate partners, accelerators, incubators, so we can help them scale. And so this is what we do at ChangeNOW today.
Amazing. Thanks, Santiago, for joining. And Chris.
Hi. Great to be on this panel, and thanks for inviting me. So I'm, as you mentioned, a lecturer in the business school at Cambridge University, teaching entrepreneurship and strategy. And I've been a lecturer for the last 16, 17 years. Before that, I was an entrepreneur. So a couple of years ago, I decided to climb back in the trenches, and we founded Carbon 13, which is a talent-first startup accelerator along the lines of Entrepreneur First and Antler, for those European-centric organizations at the moment, bringing together founders who want to start a business that has the potential to take at least 10 million tons CO2 equivalent emissions out of the emission space every year. We took in our first cohort in March. At that time, the UK was still in a full lockdown, so it was pretty virtual. 59 folks, 51 of whom were strangers, 8 of whom were in 4 pre-existing teams. By the 1st of May, they'd come together in 23 very nascent teams. Those 22 of those teams survived to pitch for a pre-seed investment in mid-July. We made 8 investments. It's a founder-driven initiative, right? We don't have most of human activity has some kind of carbon implication, right? So we don't have a thesis around you've got to, it's got to be in particular sectors. It's really about build that first principles case around your carbon impact, build that first principles case around your value proposition, build that first principles case around your business model, and very importantly, do first principles based teaming, right? And we're very hot on the word teaming as a verb rather than as a sort of as a flow rather than a stock, and that the teams that are really going to make the difference are the ones that are founded on great principles of openness and collaboration and shared purpose and alignment. So those 8 teams are now in what we call our third phase, which is an accelerator. You know, we very much look up to the work of Elemental, and even though Avra and I have not met, we're constantly saying, hey, you want to see good ventures? Go look at what Elemental's doing, and you'll get an idea of what's exciting in the space. We're building with our first cohort towards the demo day at the end of November. We took in our second cohort 5 weeks ago. This time it's 68 folks, 7 pre-existing teams, and 54 strangers. As of 10:30 this morning, the last time a new team announced itself, we were up to about to 24 teams. So the deadline is Sunday for them to form into teams, and I guess we might be at something like 30 teams. And we hope that there's a bunch of investable propositions about to be explored and developed there. So exciting times for us, and we're very happy to be making a contribution to the battle.
Amazing. I think this afternoon or morning, wherever you are, we've covered a bunch of different ways of how people can get involved in climate tech. Obviously, there is opportunities for people that are currently working a 9-to-5 job to either become founders, apply to Carbon 13, and really start a venture from scratch. There's opportunities to join a program like On Deck Climate Tech, which we had Candace earlier talk about that. If you already have a startup, and I want to focus a bit more on that group as well, because we have plenty of founders in the group, you can apply for programs like Elemental and get support from them. And no matter what you do, whether you're an investor or whether you're in government or in corporates or already have a startup, you can definitely go to ChangeNOW and connect to the ecosystem there. So it seems like there's a lot of support already happening. Do you feel there's still a big gap that we as an ecosystem, so to say, let's say 3 spokespeople of the ecosystem, we still need to fill to give more support to founders that are really early days trying to make a difference? What do you think is the biggest gap still in the ecosystem that needs to be filled? Who wants to start on that?
I'm happy to. If that, not to keep the order the same the entire session, we can switch it up next time. But yeah, I mean, I think on one hand, we have many of the technologies needed, and we are seeing this tremendous amount of climate investment. So there's the nascent tech and there's the investment, but the challenge is really one of scale, right? The scale and speed at which we need to move is astronomical. So for instance, we have, the rapid, decarbonization through electrification, for instance, can eliminate 70% of emissions in the next, 15 years with the technology we have today. But it's a matter of enabling and orchestrating that deployment. And a lot of the solutions are hardware solutions, and that take, hardware is hard, and it takes de-risking and it takes capital. I mean, I grew up, earned my keep at a company called Jump, where I was an early, COO and chief strategy officer, and it was hardware, and it was 2014, and we were trying to raise money, and there was government procurement involved, and my gosh, that combination made it really hard. I think we're in a slightly different place today, but our theory of change at Elemental is that entrepreneurs are wired to scale, and that's why we invest in and support them to move faster. And as I mentioned, we try to provide that interdisciplinary support to break down barriers across policy and partnerships. But I think another problem that we often talk about is the one about community and technology and marrying the gap, or minimizing the gap in investment between the two. Over the last decade at Elemental, we really saw firsthand how the technology innovation is only part of the solution, and the best solutions are the ones that are guided by the community impact, because again, hardware, often deployments in the real world. So we try to work with local governments and community groups and local partners as part of this integral deployment strategy. and elevate this idea of community ethos at the center. So, seeking external, external voices or voices that you might not think to check in with. And so, as I mentioned, I came to Elemental as an entrepreneur and an operator, and we did see this in my own personal, history and experience. Saw, scaling these transportation companies, Jump and Super Pedestrian, that the intersection of policy, technology, and community is really where the challenge, but also the opportunity was. And in the early days, as I said, it was impossible it was very difficult, it was very challenging to raise money. But this idea was, well, how does this scale, right? That was the question I always heard from investors. How does this scale? How does this scale? And my answer has been the same for almost 10 years now, which is that the only way to scale is to think about, the community deployment. And of course, we need to centralize. And of course, there needs to be efficiency. But with so many technology deployments in climate tech, there needs to be local tailoring. So we do a lot of this at Elemental. And like I said, I think 6 years later, the market understands these factors and these forces a little bit more. But we do a lot of this at Elemental. We ask our portfolio companies to pair deployments with community groups. We provide guidance on how to do that. We ask them to pay community partners for their work like you would a contractor. And we ask our portfolio companies to really think holistically about how they deploy. But there's still more to be done. And I think that's an important barrier to highlight for this group because you have so many founders in the audience.
That theme is super interesting, and it came up in our previous chat as well, which is there is some people that would say, okay, we need to basically replicate what Facebook, Amazon, and Google did in terms of massively hyper-scaling companies. We just need to focus on impact, and we need to focus on solving climate-related problems. But there was a question from the audience as well, how do we actually change our paradigm as well and maybe not replicate some of the mistakes that were made in kind of the digital revolution era, I would say, right? So Avra, you are at Elemental, you're actually having this concept of place-based innovation, I think you call it, right? Is there any kind of tangible step that entrepreneurs and founders in the audience can take to still build massively scalable company? I'm sure that's your goal with all the portfolio companies in your portfolio. You want them to be bigger than Amazon and Google, but also consider basically the community elements and make sure that we're not replicating some of the mistakes that have been made in the past.
Yeah. So that's a great point. So one of our early investors was Sean O'Sullivan, SOSV, and he always said, nail it before you scale it. And I think thinking about those first deployments and de-risking them and finding ways to make sure that those initial deployments of a new technology take this holistic approach will inform the scale plan going forward. So it's not that there's this sort of bifurcation where you work on a deployment and you're thinking about the community over here and then you're scaling later. It's about a process of constant learning, a growth mindset, understanding the factors that might, actually become impediments to scale, and thinking about ways to both systematically de-risk a scale plan and find the community partnerships or the community members or government policies that can help you create the tailwinds to scale faster. So I think just thinking about zooming all the way out and how those early deployments become a test case for future deployments. And, the journey is a long one, right? Don't give up. The journey is a long one. So thinking about not everything, you don't scale first, especially with a hardware product. That can be a disaster, right? You don't want to scale a product that's not market ready. So it's about that iterative growth. And that doesn't mean you need to be slow. It doesn't mean you don't need to, it's not to say you shouldn't be ambitious. You shouldn't try to be as big as Facebook. But even Facebook wasn't Facebook when it started, right? And that's the thing to remember.
Chris, you want to add on that?
Well, I would say, I wouldn't describe Facebook and Google as having made mistakes. I would say if your mission is to connect everyone in the world, then you're connecting a lot of racists and terrible people, as well as good people. And if your mission is to organize the world's information and be a gatekeeper for that, then that's sort of built into your DNA. And what we're seeing as unintended consequences of that are just consequences of the way that they were conceived. So this is why I always go back to sort of first principles thinking, right? Is that if you're if you're a purpose-driven business, does your purpose have a lot of negative externalities built into it? Then don't pursue that purpose, right? When we started on the journey to build Carbon 13 back in spring 2019, certainly in our sort of Cambridge, southeast of England sort of ecosystem where we're starting from, we met lots of founders, lots of investors and sort of ecosystem members who said, well, yeah, clean tech has this problem, clean tech has that problem, clean tech has the other problem, right? We're entrepreneurs, so we don't see it that way. We see it as, well, clean tech is needed by the world to help keep us alive. Climate tech is needed by the world to help keep us alive. So it's the investors who are going to have to adjust. It's the world's institutions that are going to have to adjust to the fact that we need to find ways to stay alive. We certainly, I mentioned that we have this sort of 10 million ton target, right? We say, well, in normal accelerators, they're always talking about unicorns, and we're talking about 10 million tons of CO2 equivalent emissions. Back in spring 2019, this was still considered to be an ambitious target. Of course, now the Americans and the sort of the effulgence of the climate tech space is such that everybody's talking about 0.5 gigaton and this kind of ambition. But our idea is to say, yes, a lot of what we have to do has to be place-based. A lot of what we do has to be. I fully agree with what Avra's saying about impact has to work in the context that it's set. But we want our founders to be thinking internationally from the first moment, right? And not to say, well, a UK market or a European market is enough. One of the benefits of this sort of existing, albeit flawed, institution of entrepreneurship and venture capital that we're working within is that it is a vector for international innovation, right? You don't actually have to wait until the policy environment changes to the perfect policy environment in a particular country if you have something that you can sell in that country that has a decarbonization impact, right? So we're very much, Avra's describing the way that they're wrestling with it. Everybody in this space has got to wrestle with the same issue. We haven't got time. We've got to get the scaling done, but we have to get it right. There's no point. I mean, I despair. I'm sure everyone in our panel despair. You open up your newsletters and you see these things getting investment that are have the ClimateTech label attached to them, and you think, wow, I think the chances of that making some impact are pretty minimal, and yet some investment firm has decided that it's got the right label and the right sort of metrics and and the rest of it, and they're getting behind it. So great. Carbon 13 and I don't possess a monopoly on wisdom. I'm sure some of those projects will end up that I'm turning my nose up at will end up being huge successes. But if you talk about, going back to your original question, Micah, you talk about these gaps. There's a gap which is figuring out these problems from a very grounded place of carbon impact, of the purpose, and not getting swept away by waves of greenwashing or waves of sort of impression management first and foremost, if you like.
Got it. Santiago, what's your view on this? Obviously, you've been part of kind of a broader ecosystem as well, and kind of growing that ecosystem yourself as part of ChangeNOW. What do you feel are the gaps in the climate tech space, and how do we get more people to really take action on things that are really impactful, make a difference, and get them the right support they need?
Well, thanks for the question. I will address it with two trends I've noticed. The first one is that at the beginning, when I say at the beginning, for me is 5 years ago. And I say it's not a long time ago, but 4 to 5 years ago, there were huge gaps between funding and solutions, between talent and solutions. And I think that now the gaps are definitely much smaller. And I would say that I can't just tell you this is the one gap we have to fill, to move on. I think that the way we see how works an ecosystem is a bit like a brain, meaning that in a brain, the more connections you have in your brain, the more the more powerful it is. So an ecosystem is the same thing. The more connections you build between the different players, and the more powerful is your ecosystem. So really, this is one of the things we try to organize and push forward with ChangeNOW. And so here, when you are just talking about connections, that means that there are a lot of smaller gaps to fill, but not a big one. This is how I see it today. The second trend I see is that there is, I think, a shift right now in the ethics of the ecosystem. When we started for the first edition, we managed to find 200 projects that we showcased. It was hard enough to find 200 good projects. Now it's pretty easy to find 1,000 good projects, good ideas. I would say the challenge at each one of the period of those moments is very different. At the beginning, we just needed to grow the number of solutions existing. So you just needed to have a good idea to move forward and grow your project. Today, I think that just a good idea is not enough. What you really need is to have science with you, because I think that to scale, if you manage to put science behind what you're saying, this is a real door opener to find funding, to find support, because more and more people in this ecosystem are really keen to have a real, true impact, and science will help you in that.
That's a really good point to share, and I'd love to have the perspective of Avra and Chris on that as well. I mean, Chris, you're embedded in Cambridge University as well. I'm sure you're bridging that gap between science and entrepreneurs as well. But how can we kind of make sure we have this scientific backing as well, and it's not just a bunch of tech bros sitting somewhere in a tech hub in Silicon Valley, in London, wherever it may be, and thinking, oh, wow, this is an exciting idea, this is great, VCs putting money behind it, but it actually not being potentially the most impactful solution that people can work on. How do you bridge the gap between science and then entrepreneurial impact? Maybe Chris, you want to start on that one?
So about it, I mean, part of it is about a quarter to a third of our cohorts are chemists and non-computer science engineers and scientists, right? Scientists, and so it's great to have, it's part of what we're trying to do is build in a kind of clash of cultures and a clash of mentalities and a clash of perspectives into our into our thinking, right? And so we've got, quite apart from anything that our team does, the founding team of Carbon 13 does, and the senior team, and our, we have a bunch of domain experts and entrepreneurs and carbon experts in residence. But the cohort themselves, put a lot of pressure on each other to keep each other honest, right? Because if somebody tries to put something forward that, there's half a dozen physicists in the room saying, no, perpetual motion doesn't exist actually. If somebody, when people are bringing forward your sort of classic, I'm trying not to be insulting to anyone, right? But, your classic ideas that are about a kind of tiny increment of of behavioral change that it's very difficult to see the theory of change playing out in any realistic way. There's a bunch of skeptics within our community who are ready to say, hey, wait a second, right? But what's part of our logic is engineers tend to talk to engineers and think it's an engineering problem. Social impact people tend to come from the humanities and social sciences and think that it's all a behavior change problem. We need, those perspectives to come together, and we need those perspectives to sort of, reason out how we're going to do this in a different way. Now, as part of our process, all the ventures for whom it's relevant need to engage in a life cycle analysis of their intended impact. We put a lot of emphasis on total avoidable carbon or total addressable carbon, and these it's all kind of new stuff. Maybe not to my fellow panelists, but new and kind of the positive the positive way forward. We decided. I still have my day job in the university. I went to the dean of the business school and said, am I allowed to set up a venture builder on the side? By the way, it's going to be totally climate change focused. He said, well, I guess Cambridge faculty are supposed to do innovative stuff, so good luck. But we deliberately started outside the university because we wanted to get going quickly. Right? It would have taken an extra 2-3 years to do it inside the structures. About the time we've seen other universities in the UK start to have interesting initiatives around this space, but we were able to just get going a little bit quicker. Success has 1,000 fathers, as I've been telling my team since day one. And suddenly it's much easier, now that things are really rolling, it's much easier to have those conversations with the scientists and with the folks inside the university, because they're saying, oh yeah, okay, right, you have an actual team for me to talk to, and that team has a credible engineer on it or a credible scientist on it. Of course, I'm willing to engage. So, people think, oh, well, how can we harness the scientists to give their input? It's more like, how can we create the magnet? How can we create the pull factor for them to feel that giving, some of their precious time and expertise is a worthwhile thing to do. And as I'm just echoing things that Avra says, because obviously they've got it well organized. It is all about community building, right? It's all about community building.
Got it, Avra. Maybe on that, do you want to expand a little bit on that? You already spoke a little bit of place-based innovation, the importance of community. How does that all relate to science and really maximizing the impact of the climate tech space?
Yeah, it's a great question, and the comments already made were spot on. Plus one to them. I think that the on the science side, we're vetting the technology. We tend to be slightly later stage, so we really are vetting the technology from all angles. From the scientific angle, we have directors of innovation. From the community angle, from the customer angle. And we have folks who live and breathe this stuff on our team, right? But then on the other side, so in terms of the sort of dichotomy painted between science on one hand and tech bros on the other, that's where sort of the community comes in, right? We're trying to redesign the venture entrepreneurial world, right? So, and that's what we at Elemental really focus on. So 40% of our portfolio is serving customers in frontline communities, right? So that's real. And in terms of the makeup of our portfolio companies, it's 60% of the CEOs are either from a traditionally excluded race or gender. So we're trying to find ways to bring different perspectives and different companies solving solutions for different types of people, different founders from different backgrounds, right? This is about bringing more, and this is, I think, why this summit is so excellent. It's about how do we bring more people into the tent? How do we bring more people into the solution? Because we need to bring all those solutions to bear to be able to, have any hope of combating this crisis, which I think we can, but we need everybody. So I think taking the approach of adding to science a whole universe of different types of solutions for different types of people with different founding teams is part of the process.
Amazing. Thanks for sharing. We got a lot of questions streaming in from the audience, and I'd love to get to them and share some of them with you. For anybody in the audience, in the stage area on the right side, you have a Q&A section as well. You can actually vote on questions being submitted, so we'll read those with the most votes first. But feel free to submit more there as well. Yeah, just make sure you're going to the stage section and then to the Q&A to submit your question. So I'd like to start with one question from Tiger. We mentioned hardware solutions and the need for hardware solutions to decarbonize and become climate neutral as an economy or as economies across the world. Where does the panel see the trillions of dollars of capital coming in from? Like, who's going to fund all this change that we need? Anybody feels compelled to answer that one?
Everywhere.
Yeah, we're all going to fund it.
Mm-hmm. Government,
Well,
you know,
definitely, I think.
everything.
Yeah.
Yep. Go ahead.
Well, I think that the money is here. You know, it's a bit everywhere. Just a lot of people want to invest in this kind of in the field, but actually they don't really know how to do it yet. I think this is also this here. Well, sometimes I try to discuss this point with some politics here in France. Is can't we imagine like a law where you ask all the people who are doing savings, you know, where do you want your money to go in a range of going to just clean to very bad investments, you know, for the planet and the environment, and you can put your where you can pin where you want to be, you know, and so this would give like a huge incentive, I would say, or it's not even an incentive, but it's a new rule for banks to adapt where they put the money of the investment, the money of the savings. Just, I want to say that, you know, today we have a lot of debates about sovereignty of data, sovereignty of many things, but the sovereignty of your savings, this is a point that's not yet totally addressed. And I think that if you can put that in a process, well, you could have a big shift of savings towards climate.
That's a good point. I don't know if Chris, you want to add something onto this in a second, you can, but I want to follow up with one other question here that's very related and that I want to throw in here. Santiago, you're mentioning how do we get more people to invest their savings essentially kind of in more climate friendly or solutions for climate change. And Robert is asking here, basically, according to Oxfam, just 8 men own the same wealth as half of the world, right? If you look at a lot of capital in the world, obviously it comes from the richest of the richest. Even if you look at who's behind some VC funds, obviously in many cases it is pension funds, which is great, but in many cases it's also the money from the richest of the richest. So his question is, how can we be sure we get real change when financing startups? And I think one aspect of that is how can we get more people to participate in that rather than, again, like rely on the same old model that we've been operating in the tech ecosystem for decades. Any views on that? Chris, you want to double down on that, or anybody else on that?
Well, we're in a situation where you know, we might be too late, right? We might already be too late, right? So the world is waking up to this and saying, okay, private sector, do something, because of the way the world is organized at the moment, the only part of our world that people really trust to get things done quickly and efficiently is the private sector, right? So people are throwing money at the private sector and throwing directions at the private sector, saying, "Private sector, get your act together." You know? The analogy that I come back to, I know it's a very, very distasteful one, but it is a war. You know, we're mobilizing, right? The world is saying, okay, and what do you get? You know, what certainly in British culture we have a phrase, war profiteer, right? There's a kind of concept of people who make a distastefully large amount of money from what's supposed to be a collective effort to win a war. You know, I'm looking for that first instance in journalism of somebody talking about climate profiteering, right? And there being a sort of, you know, entrepreneurship as it's currently constructed is an inherently wasteful process, right? I talked earlier about, well, there's a bunch of projects that are getting astonishing amounts of funding, and I'm looking at them and saying, really? That's the answer to the climate crisis? I don't think so, right? But it is it's a process by which we launch thousands and thousands and thousands of ships, most of which will sink, and which we believe that ingenuity will mean that the projects that should get built and the projects that should happen eventually will get built. I don't see an answer to Robert's question in that, right? I don't see an answer to the question, well, how do we do this while also stopping the rich from getting richer? I'm afraid I don't see, you know, I don't see that you know, the answer there. I think of entrepreneurship as a technology, right? We've invented this technology for solving a certain class of problems, a class of problems that corporates don't want to solve and are not kind of structurally oriented to solve. And that technology just happens to map pretty well, not perfectly, which is why we're talking about the Googles and Facebooks of this world, but that technology maps pretty well onto the climate crisis. Right? We need business model innovation. We need behavioral change innovation. We need innovation from people who get going before the regulations are, you know, the policy space is remotely kind of clear. We need cross-disciplinary innovation. All of these four areas, entrepreneurs are the ones who do these things, not other types of innovators. And so, yeah, there's going to be a lot of unjust fortunes made, you know, from solving the climate crisis, because otherwise we're all going to die, right? And that's an unfortunate thing. But if you don't believe that, if you think that's all wrong, then you should join Extinction Rebellion, or, you know, just be political and not try to use entrepreneurship and technology. But, you know, my belief is that we haven't got much time, and entrepreneurship already exists, so let's use it.
Super powerful. We have two more questions, but feel free, Santiago and Avra, if you want to interrupt me on anything and add any points, do let me know. But we have one really practical question from Stephanie Lemke. She says, since you mentioned international opportunities, is there a database for international programs or grants for climate tech companies? We don't expect you to read out a link right now, but maybe is there like easy resources, communities, places to turn to for founders in the audience that are looking for grant funding or VC funding, any type of funding for their companies? Anything you can recommend beyond your own programs?
I don't know, but it's a great question, and there should be one. And I think that that's something I can look into and make sure to follow up.
Yeah, I don't know either, but just for the funding in the relation to VC, I think that, well, it's really rare when international VC will put money in a local startup. When I visited Silicon Valley, the rule of the VCs where we invest only in startups that are at 40 miles from our office, because we want to meet sometimes with the entrepreneur. So don't try to see definitely always the list of international VCs. Just try to connect as much as possible with your local VCs. Normally they should have enough money to make you go to the next level.
And I have one bit of advice on this, which is unprompted, but when I was in the early days of scaling in the transportation space, a lot of grants were really important because they helped us prove a market. They provided funding. Sometimes grants can also be a step out of what you're building. And so just to be careful about finding the right type of accelerant, because not all grants, sometimes the burden of reporting and the output were not necessarily where you might want to go. So just put that on your radar.
Really good point. I think especially in the social impact space, there's so many grant funders that have certain agendas as well. And I think especially if you're desperate for money, there's a fine line between trying to fit your startups into whatever they're looking for versus becoming that versus staying true to your mission, right? So appreciate that input. Great. We have one more from Kyle. He's asking basically around, is there a blind spot or white space that is currently underserved by ClimateTech Ventures? Do you see ClimateTech Ventures moving all into very similar spaces, or is there like a big wide gap that nobody seems to solve a certain type of problem that if people are in the audience, they should be solving that type of problem? Who wants to go first on that?
I can go on this one. Well, I'm not sure that this is a blank space, and I think that there are people on all the questions, but if there is one of the topics I think is really promising, is the one of regenerative agriculture. So this is a different kind of tech, because it's a tech back to the soil, to agriculture, and not necessarily I would say digital tech. So it's very different, but I think that this is a real promising field to explore.
Mm-hmm. Chris, Avra, anything on that?
Yeah. I mean, Regen Ag is great. Built environment, super exciting right now. I think, it's one of those things. It's a great question, but if you think you see a gap, then look closer, and you might discover, there's a lot of clever people around the world working on this problem already, right? And that's, if I get very down at Christmas when I see people kind of engaging in primitive consumerist rituals, right? But what gives me hope is how many smart people are working on this problem already, right? So, to the previous question about like the database, right? We have this feeling like, yeah, the answer must be out there on a database, right? And it's no, the answer is a community, right? The answer is go and find a community. It doesn't matter where the community is in a way, but although Cambridge is good, but it doesn't matter where the community is, but you need a community. You achieve whatever you're going to achieve is through other people, right? It's through other people taking up the fire that maybe you light, but the fact that you lit the fire soon, if it's really going to spread, it soon becomes irrelevant who lit the fire, right? The point is that the fire is spreading.
Yep.
Anything on that?
No, I mean, that's such a beautiful sentiment. I agree wholeheartedly. I think the built environment is really interesting. Made of Air is an elemental company. And so they're looking at it and they're investigating the space. And so I think the point I would make is just how interconnected the industries and sectors are. So, if you think across like energy, agriculture, water, they're all interconnected. They all intersect with the health of the environment, the health of the, human psyche, and actually, just straight up human health, right? I think that that's an interesting angle that we're seeing a lot of innovation in water, right? Around measurement, auditing, lead removal. And so I think a focus on, wastewater infrastructure and indoor air quality, that's also a really interesting sector. But again, it's can sit across energy, buildings, water, and carbon removal. When we were at TED Countdown Elemental Team, a few weeks ago, the word carbon capture came up over a dozen times in conversations. So there's just a lot of room for innovation. There's a lot of smart people working on it. And just to add to what Chris is saying, being an entrepreneur is lonely. So, find that community, because you need the mentors, you need the thought partners, but you also need the people to help lift you up, because it's important work and it can be very lonely work.
Super valuable advice. Thank you for that. I got one more question from the audience, and then I'd like to ask a concluding question to everyone before we wrap up. One is from Zane, I think, basically talking about the balance of finance, science, and tech seems to already happen in the climate tech space. So we talked about involvement of scientists and tech and how to finance that. But basically, where does brand building and communication come in? How do maybe people that come from a brand communications background, make their contribution. I would have like a million ideas on companies I've seen that actually in the climate tech space are making a huge difference, mainly driven by brand and communication, not only by tech. And I think it's a big misconception too that you have to be a deep tech company to be a climate tech company. But what are your views on that? Who wants to share some thoughts on that?
I think I would just kind of iterate on something I said earlier, which is to sort of get to the objectives that we need to get to. There's a lot of work that has to be done, including building and scaling the technological innovation, which, by the way, requires branding, comms, marketing. How do we communicate what we're doing? How do we make it digestible? But we also have to sort of win the politics and the policy. This is work that the team behind Speed and Scale and John Dewar's OKRs and the Climate Action Plan that they've been talking about. There's a lot of ways we need to accelerate the work of the climate tech entrepreneurs through policy, through bringing more people along on this journey, through finding ways to tell positive stories to keep the energy alive. And so there's absolutely room from the inside a company, super specific, granular marketing branding, to globally and zooming all the way out. So I just think that in terms of, there's room for everybody. And not only is there room for everyone, every person is needed to sort of help us get to where we want to go.
I mean, we the question that we got asked earlier about, well, what about the balance between hardware and the hardware? I mean, I'm just paraphrasing something that Avra just said. The reason that the hardware companies suddenly are more able to get funded than they were even a couple of years ago is because of better moving of the story, right? Now, that may sound silly because surely the move in the investment climate is exogenous to any individual entrepreneur, right? But the individual team, the specific team that breaks through, that manages to sort of tell the story in a way that resonates, that allows it to make progress. Well, that's a storytelling issue, right? And of course, part of what's going on here is that we're using terms that kind of describe job functions in big companies to sort of apply to different aspects of what's the entrepreneur's job. The entrepreneurs and the team have to somehow figure out all these aspects between them. Right? Paul Graham has a great line where he says, you need about 5 different really important types of expertise to make a startup. And it's really great if those 5 important types of expertise all reside in about 2 people, because then you're just going to be able to go faster and cheaper in the earlier stages.
Santiago, anything to add on that before we wrap up?
Actually, this was pretty clear what Chris and Avra said. I don't have any to add to this. Yeah, thanks, Michael.
Love it. Maybe as we close, a quick statement from each of you, just 1 or 2 sentences or a brief statement for each. For the founders in the audience that are looking to grow their climate tech companies, what do you think when you look at the ventures that you have interacted with? What's the advice that makes the most difference? What should they be paying attention on in order to maximize their impact and grow their companies? Is there one key advice you would give them?
I can go with that. It will be a very short advice, is that we spend a lot of time here talking about investment and DCs at the end, but the first thing you have to look for when you're starting a company is customers and clients. I think this is the best funding you can find, and so yeah, focus first on clients and customers before funding from external funding.
Chris, anything on that?
Well, it's always hard to boil it down to just one. I mean, I think first-time founders underestimate the extent to which ambition is a force multiplier. right? And that's really, you know, you have this. I mean, I'm sure many of the people in this room have watched at some time that TV sitcom Silicon Valley, right? And it's fun. It's fun, right? Because it's about, you know, a bunch of sort of schmoes who have this tiny little thing that doesn't really look like much or doesn't amount to much, and yet they're wandering around saying, "I'm going to change the world with this. You know, this is going to change everything. This is going to be huge. This is going to be everything," and that's inherently funny, right? And it's always going to be funny, and it's been funny since the dawn of humanity that, you know, people who are willing to be so foolish as to wander around saying, "Oh yeah, no, it's not. You can barely see it, but it's going to change the world." It seems preposterous, but we have the means, we have built the systems through tech entrepreneurship to be able to make that a reality. And so, you know, that sort of idiocy is actually something which can make you more likely to get through the first stages, and than saying, well, you know, what's this? I want to do it, but I want something that's quite safe within the space, right? I need something that's kind of, you know, I feel I can get my arms around and really really understand. So but you know, you asked for one piece of advice. There's a lot of other things to say, but I'll shut up.
Avra, any closing advice on that?
I mean, this isn't necessarily where I wanted to be closing, but I do think there's lots of different types of capital. Don't forget that. There's lots of different types of capital. The types of capital are, you know, there's more types and more of it now than there was. And so it's about really just persistence. And that's been true from the beginning of time. But I think we're at this inflection point. You see corporates engaged, you see, you know, private equity, you see family offices, you see VC, and VC is an important part of this because they're designed to help companies scale, right? So I don't want to discount the VC dollar, but I do want to just emphasize that it's a new world, and there's a lot of opportunity, and the same rules of entrepreneurship apply, which is all about being persistent and not giving up.
Love it. Thank you so much to all of you three. I could have carried on with this for quite a while, discussing kind of the breadth of challenges in the ecosystem. And thanks for sharing your stories and your advice with us here. And thanks everybody in the audience for engaging as well. Do check out ChangeNOW in any way. If you're a startup, you can actually apply to be part of ChangeNOW next year. There we go. I'm doing the pitch. Obviously, if you're in the early days, make sure you're applying to Carbon 13 as well. If you basically want to move into the sector and you're clear that you want to be a founder. And again, Elemental, I don't have to say much, but it's basically your prime address. If you're already a founder, you want to get some additional support and be part of an amazing ecosystem and community like we mentioned before. Thanks, everyone. To you three, I'll cover briefly what's going to happen next. We have a little bit of break as such in terms of the panels and the fireside chats. So the stage will be closed for a little while. And that will give everybody the opportunity to navigate to the networking tab on the left side. So everybody that wants to stick around for that, please use that. What we're doing with that, we're basically just engineering some serendipity. So we basically randomly speed date you with somebody else in the ecosystem. So once you click on there, you will be matched with a random person that's attending as well. There may be a founder. Most of you are founders. There may be an investor. There may be somebody in the ecosystem. And the reason we're doing this is so you can basically run into a bunch of people and see how you can collaborate with each other. So feel free to click on that. And then a little bit later, if you check the schedule as well, you will see that we have our first co-creation session, which I'm really excited about. Again, check the schedule for your specific time, as we're all in different time zones. But what we'll do during that session, we'll have two exciting startups share their story and what they're doing. One actually from Hong Kong, and one from Austria. And what we'll do is they'll share what they're doing and their work, as well as one specific challenge that they're currently facing. And then we'll give the opportunity to everyone in the audience to basically chip in and collectively brainstorm with us on how we can help them unblock that challenge with some creative ideas, some thoughts, pointing them the right direction. So do make sure that you stick around for that. And then at the end of the day, we also run a debriefing session on Clubhouse, which is not going to be part of the Hop-In platform. But if you go to the schedule, you can find the link to Clubhouse there. And we're kindly hosted by the ClimateTech Club, about 20,000 people in the ClimateTech Club. So I'm looking forward to that as well. For now, thanks very much to Avra, Santiago, and Chris. Thanks very much for joining us, and I'll see you very soon later for the next session.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.